My own child called me a burden and mocked me with, "Good luck paying rent." After selling the company his father built, my heart trembled, but wisdom steadied me, and I answered softly, already shaping the choice that would turn his words back on him. One step, quiet but deliberate, set everything else in motion. Believe me, the story had only just begun. Before I begin, I'd love to know, how are you doing today? And where are you listening from? The winter air wrapped itself around me as I stepped out of the car in front of the church. Atlanta didn't usually cut this sharp, but grief made the cold bite harder. My husband's casket was already inside, waiting. I pressed my shawl close, not just against the chill, but against the weight of what this day carried. People moved toward me, neighbors, old friends, folks from the congregation offering words of comfort that dissolved the moment they hit my ears. I nodded, kept my chin high. I knew I had to show dignity. Eudora Finchley, faithful as ever, came close, her warm hand gripping mine. "You don't stand alone, Marceline," she whispered. Her words reached me where most could not. Still, my eyes strayed to the road just in time to see Cassian and Isolde arrive, late and perfectly polished, like they were stepping onto a stage. His jaw was set, her smile painted too bright. I felt a knot in my chest, but straightened my back. "Keep steady," I told myself. "This is not the moment to break." Inside, the organ hummed low, carrying us into the ceremony. The pastor spoke of faith and rest, but my mind clung to the sight of my son's indifference. He looked at his watch, then at his wife, who leaned close and whispered something that made him smirk. I folded my hands tighter, letting the sound of the hymn hold me upright. At the graveside, the air grew stiller, as though time itself was watching. As the pastor bowed his head in prayer, I heard it Cassian's voice, low but sharp. "With him gone, she has no say now. It's our turn." Isolde's reply came like a blade slipping between ribs. "We'll handle it our way. She's had her time." My breath caught, but I didn't look at them. My eyes stayed on the coffin, my hands trembling just enough for me to feel, but not enough for others to see. Betrayal tasted bitter in my mouth, even here, as the dirt waited to cover the man who gave them everything. My own son planned my erasure. I thought of the nights Thaddeus and I sat at this very table, planning, building, sacrificing so Cassian could inherit more than just money, so he could inherit strength. To hear him discard me before his father was even settled in the ground carved deeper than any insult I'd ever known. Isolde's hand brushed Cassian's sleeve, her smirk plain to me though no one else noticed. The pastor's words blurred, my ears only held onto theirs. But I remembered Thaddeus telling me once after a bitter boardroom fight, "Never let them see you startled. If they think you expected it, you already won." So I lifted my chin and let my tears fall with grace. They thought I was broken. I knew better. When the first soil hit the wood of the casket, I whispered, so low only I could hear, "This fight has just begun." After the last hymn, people drifted back to their cars. Eudora squeezed me once more, her eyes full of sorrow. "You'll get through this," she said. Cassian and Isolde barely looked my way as they walked off, their words from moments before still echoing back at home. The house swallowed me with silence. I set a cup of tea on the table where Thaddeus once read the morning news. His picture in uniform from his younger days sat beside the vase of lilies. I stared at it and whispered, "They don't know who they're dealing with." The clock ticked, my heart steadied. That evening, Cassian and Isolde returned, faces polite, voices smoother than butter. The table groaned with food, but the air was colder than the January night. Forks tapped against plates louder than conversation. "It must be hard keeping up this place all alone," Isolde said sweetly. Cassian leaned back, folding his arms. "Maybe it's time you think about downsizing, Mother. A smaller home would make things easier." I set my fork down carefully, looked him in the eye. "Easier for whom?" "Cassian." His smile thinned. "You'll see." I let a slow smile rise on my lips. Calm as stone. I'd built this house. I'd held it through storms he couldn't imagine. He believed grief had made me fragile. He had no idea it had sharpened me. That night, when the door finally closed behind them, I sat alone again. My tea had gone cold, but I held the cup anyway, letting its weight remind me of steadiness. I remembered Thaddeus's words, "Never let them make you feel small." They had tried. At my husband's grave, at my own table. And yet, I sat taller than ever. I thought burying my husband would be the hardest day. I whispered into the quiet. I was wrong. What I heard today was only the beginning, the morning after the funeral. I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in years, paper sliding across hardwood. I sat up, heart heavy, and saw an envelope resting at the crack of my bedroom door, in bold red letters. The words, "Urgent, final notice," stared back at me. I opened it slowly, the kind of slow that comes from bracing yourself. The bill listed overdue utilities under my name. The paper threatened disconnection within 72 hours. My eyes caught the small errors our street suffix spelled wrong, an account date that didn't line up, a remittance slip with a font I'd never seen from that company. Someone wanted me to panic, to feel the floor tilt beneath my feet. But fear, I reminded myself, is a poor accountant. It makes errors in the books. I smoothed the paper against the table, took a photo of each page, and labeled the file with the time. If they wanted to play games with paper, I'd keep my own ledger. I dialed the utility company, set the phone on speaker. A young man answered, polite but tired. I asked him to confirm if any recent changes had been made to the account. He hesitated, then read from his screen yesterday. A web request had added my name and switched the contact email. "Give me the exact timestamp," I said. My tone was steady, though my jaw was tight. He gave it down to the minute. "Open a fraud review," I told him, "and I want a case number." He gave me one, then suggested placing a soft hold on the account. He promised a confirmation email. I asked for the request's IP address and device information. He said he'd escalate to IT. "Thank you for helping me protect my household." I told him. I wrote down his name, ID number, the length of the call. I placed everything neatly in a new folder labeled Home Fraud Risk. If someone wanted me rattled, they'd find me recording instead. Later that morning, I sat on the porch with Eudora. She held the bill between two fingers, frowning like it smelled bad. "That's mean, baby. Mean and small." She suggested a fraud alert with the credit bureaus, printing 2 copies of everything, one for the safe, one for the lawyer. Lock the mailbox. Save every call recording. Write it all down, date and time. Don't let them erase you with scraps of paper. I didn't say Cassian's name. She didn't ask. Silence filled in the math. "Hold your line," she said, squeezing my hand. "Don't let them see you scramble." I nodded. Today, I would walk out the door composed, upright, and very visible. I chose a navy suit from the closet, the one I wore when Thaddeus and I signed our first bank loan, low heels, polished. I slipped my wedding band back on, tucked the fake bill into a labeled envelope, and placed a notepad and pen in my bag. I emailed myself every photo, every note. Nothing would live on one device. Before leaving, I flicked on the porch light in broad daylight. Home is occupied. Home is prepared, at the office. The security guard gave me the nod of old respect. The receptionist barely looked up. "Appointment," she asked, sliding a sticky visitor label across the desk instead of a printed pass. I signed my full name slowly, each letter deliberate. In the lobby, a memo caught my eye. Leadership Portraits Update. My stomach sank. I walked the familiar hallway, noticing the fresh paint, the new carpet runner, small changes, loud intentions. And then I saw at the wall where my portrait had hung for 20 years. In its place, dust outlined my shoulders. An empty rectangle marking where I once belonged. Beside it, Cassian's smile beamed too wide from a new frame. Isolde, in a blazer she hadn't earned, smirked from another. The brass plate below now read Leadership. Founders erased. I touched the wall where my picture used to be. Dust clung to my fingertip, gray against my skin. I didn't wipe it off. I took 3 photographs, included the memo, and emailed them to myself and a private archive. If they need me erased to stand taller, I thought they were never tall. Upstairs, a new assistant blocked me at the executive floor. "They're in a meeting," he said without checking. Meeting's such a gentle word for locked doors. I left a handwritten note. "Please return original founder portraits to their historical location. M.D." I requested a copy of the portrait policy via email, in the elevator down. A young accountant whispered, "I'm sorry," without meeting my eyes. Guilt lived in that silence louder than confession. Back home, I scanned the fake bill in the lobby memo, saving files by date, time, subject, in a new spiral notebook. I wrote envelope under door, utility changes, lobby memo, portraits removed. A text arrived from Cassie and Mom. "We should discuss the house. Tomorrow works." I set the phone face down. Discussions were where people hid their decisions. I pulled out the cedar chest, lifting the first contract Thaddeus and I had signed decades ago. I laid it under the lamp, the ink steady, the paper alive with memory. History wasn't nostalgia, it was evidence. And evidence would keep me steady. The contract sat under the lamp, its edges yellowed and soft with age. The ink bled into the fibers. Coffee rings marked the margins from nights Thaddeus and I worked until dawn, our backs stiff but our eyes bright with plans. I squared the paper with the lamp's base, the way I always did before making decisions that mattered. That ritual steadied me, reminded me that precision had kept us afloat when charm alone would have sunk us. My eyes traced the clauses we had insisted on. Notice periods stretched beyond the industry norm. Late fee caps written in plain language. A dispute venue tucked close to home. Those small lines had been our shield when storms came. Paperwork is a time machine, I thought, one that doesn't forget who did the work. Paper tells on you. It reveals character long after intentions fade. I breathed deep, let the grief press through me, then opened the door to memory, the place where my backbone had been built. I saw us again, stepping into the Southside branch all those years ago. Thaddeus shook hands with the banker, his smile warm enough to soften stone. I opened the folder, laid out the sheets we'd worked over for weeks. The banker's gaze clung to Thaddeus, barely skimming me, until I slid the cash flow table across the desk. Silence followed. I let it hang unbothered, the way silence can weigh heavier than words. In my head, the numbers moved like soldiers' inventory days, seasonal dips, the break-even line, clean, exact. When the banker tried his test, "What if your vendor delays shipments?" I countered with a 2-supplier clause and a penalty ladder. My voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. Thaddeus's charm had softened the room, but my numbers sealed it. The stamp hit the page with a heavy thud. Loan approved. Respect had not been offered, but it was earned. I remember the landlord, too, sliding a tarnished brass key across a scarred oak desk. "Suite 2B, he said, as if the room was nothing more than rent. But for us, it was an altar. I tied that key to a plain ribbon and wore it under my blouse for weeks, its weight pressing purpose against my chest. At home, it hung by the light switch for years, waiting for my hand whenever fear crept in. That key became my anchor. Proof we belonged inside doors we had unlocked with our own grit. Tonight, as I picked it up again. Cool metal against my palm, it steadied me over the contract. I thought about the lessons I'd carried. Never raise your voice unless you want to lose ground. Ask the other side to define success in numbers. Write those numbers down. Keep a silent ledger. Who arrives on time, who shifts terms at the door, who forgets attachments. Once, a vendor tried slipping in a restocking fee. I circled it, slid it back, and waited. He removed it. Silence, I learned, is not weakness. It is a timer, and the longer it ticks, the clearer the truth becomes. We had built structure before shine. 2 accounts operating, cash and reserves never blurred. Equipment titled properly. Receipts filed each month. A 3-quote rule for any purchase that made me pause. I drafted an owner's memo outlining what would happen if one of us couldn't sign continuity we prayed we'd never need, but which later became priceless. Boring papers, perhaps, but foundations outlast fireworks. It's why the company still stood, even as Cassian tried to chisel my name off the stone. Respect had come late, but it came. Months after those first statements ran clean. Another banker asked to meet me alone. He wanted to know how I forecast so tight. I showed him my 3-bucket sheet commitments, variables, disaster lines. He called me meticulous, said my name first in the conversation. That day I bought a new ledger, one I still use, Respect. I learned is collected in arrears. Consistency pays in ways applause never will. I turned back to the present. The fake bill, the empty frame, these were not accidents. They were tactics, soft erasures stacked together until a woman's work looked like someone else's inheritance. I placed today's fraudulent notice beside our first utility statement, the ink from decades ago still sharp. The contrast cut like a blade from building a company to being written out of its history. Symbolic theft begins with labels, photos, titles until the origin disappears. I would not call or argue, I would document, layer by layer, until the timing turned their own steps into snares. Tomorrow, I would verify every vendor contact, lock the credit, request building footage to capture when my portrait was removed. The contract, the key, the ledger, they weren't nostalgia. They were a still life of intent. I was not retreating, I was assembling. I spoke aloud, voice low but firm. We built this without noise. I'll protect it the same way. My phone buzzed with a calendar invite from Cassian Company Review tomorrow 11:00 a.m. I didn't accept. I forwarded it to my attorney's archive and printed the email with its timestamp. Then I placed one more artifact on the table, a vendor's thank you note from our earliest days. Ink faded but gratitude fresh. I stared at the paper, the key, the contract, the note. They weren't relics, they were evidence. And evidence, when lined up just right, becomes armor tomorrow. I wasn't walking into a meeting. I was opening a file. I arrived 5 minutes early, shoes clicking against the marble floor. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish, and the receptionist barely lifted her head before calling out my first name, loud enough for everyone to hear, like she was paging a taxi. Not Mrs. Duval, not founder. Just a casual strip of syllables tossed into the room. A junior staffer looked over, his eyes flicking down quickly, trained to ignore. I didn't mark the boy, I marked the system that taught him. I'm here for Cassian, I said. He's with leadership. She answered, voice clipped, as if I'd wandered in off the street. I held her gaze. Visitor pass, please. She slapped down a sticky label. Again, no printed badge. Small disrespect, repeated twice, is never small. I sat in view of the elevator bank, jotting notes. The digital directory glowed on the wall with a new entry, LVL Partners Guest Wi-Fi available. Outsiders were cycling through. I snapped photos with the timestamp, storing them in my log. Disdain is loud when it thinks no one's listening. An assistant breezed by. They'll call you, she said without eye contact. The tone carried the weight of dismissal. I'll give them 15 minutes, I replied evenly, setting my phone timer on the table. Screen face up. A declaration! The door down the corridor hissed open. 2 suits emerged, whispering consolidation deck, their voices clipped with secrecy. I memorized the phrase, then tapped out a single line to Oberon hearing consolidation deck logging. I jotted down the room number, noted the quick double beep of the door code, and the exact time. The assistant's jaw flexed when she caught me writing. Silence, I found, makes people answer questions you never ask aloud. The elevator doors opened and out stepped Narina Crossfield. Perfume first, phone raised like a mirror. She greeted the receptionist with a high chirp. Is Isolde still rewriting the retirement announcement? We're going to soft launch today, right? My head lifted. Narina froze for a heartbeat, then her smile stretched too wide. Oh, Miss Duval, I didn't see you there. She fumbled her tote, spilling a folder. Pages fluttered across the marble. I knelt, steady, helping gather them. One sheet flashed upside down, phase 2. Remove legacy signage. Replace founders with a leadership. Her cheeks colored. It's just optics, she whispered, voice brittle. You know how audiences like clean lines, optics, a word that tastes like ash. I slid the folder closed and stood. Narina, I said gently, I'll need copies of any public language that includes my name. I'm not authorized, she stammered. Then please note that I've requested it. I handed her my card. I watched her slip it into her phone case, fingers trembling. I emailed the front desk requesting any drafted announcements referencing my status. CC admin. A paper trail is stronger than memory. My timer dinged. 15 minutes passed. No call. Downstairs in the cafe. Vendors spoke too loudly over lattes. We finally have someone modern. One said, Isolde gets brand. The old guard held them back. They should have retired her quietly. The other muttered, glancing my way. Dragging it out is messy. I stood, dropped my cup in the bin, and said softly but clearly, "Messy is a poor strategy." Their eyes widened as I walked out. In the corridor, a young accountant rushed past. "Sorry about the changes," he blurted, eyes pinned to the floor. Apologies flowed after harm. Never before. I logged the vendor's exact words in my notebook. Public remarks. January in my car. I dictated an email to Cassian and Isolde, CC Oberon and HR cease and desist from publishing any retirement materials with my name or likeness. Restore founder's labeling and founder portrait placement pending review. Provide all current external decks referencing leadership ownership within 24 hours. I attached photos of the directory, timestamps, and my earlier request, subject line notice of objection to misrepresentation and removal of founder attribution. At a nearby shipping store, I printed and mailed a certified copy to the company's registered agent, tracking number forwarded to Oberon. Paper beats gossip every day of the week. Outside, traffic throbbed against the winter air. I spoke into my recorder. Listing next steps, pull board minutes that approved the portrait changes, request security footage for the week my photo disappeared, comb through vendor contracts for unauthorized signatures, renew the fraud alert. I added draft one-sentence statement, factual and repeatable, if cornered. The brass key from years ago pressed against my pocket, colder than anger, steadier too. Then my phone buzzed. From Cassian re-asset consolidation next steps. From Isolde draft retirement announcement final. I marked both unread, forwarded them to Oberon, and placed the phone face down. Public cuts are useful. I said into the recorder, they prove intent. I turned the ignition. At home, the lamp and the contract waited like witnesses. Cassian's text came the morning after I'd mailed the certified letter. "We need to talk. Dinner tomorrow. Bring yourself, nothing else." I read it twice, hearing the edge behind the civility. 2 nights later, I stepped into the lobby of their condo building. The air reeked of polish and new marble, cold wealth with no memory. My heels echoed in the emptiness, and I thought of my own house, creaky wood, worn rugs, warmth. Cassian greeted me with a handshake too brisk, a son trying to prove adulthood through stiffness. Isolde followed with a smirk too faint to call a smile. She led me into their dining room, where the table gleamed. Wine already poured into tall glasses, napkins folded like blades. My first thought was simple, this isn't dinner, it's theater. I sat, and silence lay across the table heavier than the polished silver. Cassian cleared his throat. "We wanted to talk openly, Mom, about the future." "Of course," I said, folding my napkin slowly. "Buying time. Future always comes." "Doesn't it?" Isolde struck first, her voice honey over steel. "You've held on to so many things. Maybe too long. Sometimes letting go is healthier." Cassian leaned forward, voice pitched as if caring. "How are you managing the house on your own utilities? Upkeep, it must be hard." "I built it," I answered plainly. "I keep it." Their glances darted, rehearsed like a duet. I sipped water instead of wine, refusing to be softened. Inside. Irritation curled like smoke, but my voice stayed even. I recognized the tactic condescension dressed as kindness. Cassian straightened his shoulders. "The company needs to move forward without legacy distractions." My hand paused on the napkin. "Cassian," I said calmly, each word clear. "I will not sit quietly while my name is erased." The fork slipped from his hand, clinking against porcelain. "I need you to hear me," I continued, tone steady. "Whatever you attempt, I will contest it publicly, legally, and permanently." Isolde scoffed, lips curling. I turned to her. "Marrying my son doesn't make you his compass, nor mine." Silence stretched. My pulse slowed. No longer anger, but clarity. Cassian's face hardened. "Fine, then let's be honest. We've already positioned Isolde as the face of the brand where your portrait's gone, and the retirement announcement is scheduled. Contracts are signed." He leaned back, words like knives. "You're a burden. Mom, Dad's gone. We need fresh blood." The sentence cut deeper than any whisper I'd overheard. I let the silence hang, one beat longer than comfort allowed, burning his words into memory like they'd been carved in stone. Finally, I spoke. "Then you've made your choice, and so have I." Isolde folded her napkin, feigning grace. "Maybe it's time you consider downsizing. Enjoy retirement gracefully." I looked her in the eye. Graceful is for those who earned their place. You haven't. Her smirk faltered. Cassian's jaw clenched, vein pulsing at his temple. I stood, my plate untouched. This wasn't about family. This was about power. And now I see you both. Clearly, as I left, I heard him mutter to her, low but sharp, "She'll fold. She always does." The door closed behind me harder than I intended. He didn't hear the sound that said otherwise. Driving home. Their words replayed in fragments, each one another cut. I grieved not only Thaddeus, but the son I thought I still had. My phone buzzed at a red light. A message from Oberon: "Got your certified copies. Stay the course." I whispered the words aloud, steadying myself. "They believe I am small," I murmured. But small things split stone when pressure builds. By the time I reached my porch, grief had become iron. I wasn't just wounded, I was awake. Later, I checked my voicemail. A blocked number, static at first, then a single word, faint, almost swallowed: "Leave." My stomach knotted, not with fear but confirmation. I wasn't just an inconvenience, I was a threat. Warnings don't make me retreat. They mark the line I refuse to cross backward. The doorbell rang twice sharp, impatient, no courtesy in the rhythm. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table, replaying the voicemail that told me to leave, pen in hand, date already logged. Through the curtain, I saw Cassian adjusting his jacket like a nervous groom. Isolde leaned into the glass, checking her lipstick, holding her phone camera ready. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the door just wide enough. "We need to talk," Cassian said, already stepping past me. His cologne trailed behind. Foreign in this house that once smelled of Thaddeus's pipe tobacco and my lemon polish, Isolde followed, heels clicking too loud, eyes darting like she owned the air. I didn't offer coffee. Instead, I sat with my legal pad open, pen uncapped, a silent announcement. "I'm not just here, I'm documenting." They sat across, framed by my own curtains, trying to flip the stage. Isolde began. "Smooth as cream, change is healthy, legacy can be heavy." Cassian slid a thin folder across. "It's done. We closed yesterday." I looked at the summary page: sale of the operating LLC, not the trust, not the name that built this house. He studied my face, waiting for collapse. "Your name is off everything that matters." He added. "Escrow disbursed?" I asked. His blink told me he hadn't expected the question. Isolde jumped in, too eager. "Funds hit today. We're flying out for our honeymoon after." My kitchen had become their rehearsal hall. They'd practiced these lines, but they hadn't practiced answers. Cassian leaned back, exhaling like a victor. "You're a burden. I sold Dad's company. Good luck paying rent." His hand swept the counter as if he'd already bought the deed, already turned me into a tenant. He slid one page toward me, no official seal, just bold letters, recommendation to vacate 90 days, theater, not law. Isolde's smile was razor thin. "We'll insure a stipend if you don't make this messy." I wrote his words verbatim on my pad: date, time, kitchen, present parties. Words weigh more when you trap them in ink. I lifted my eyes. Closing statement. "We'll send it," Cassian muttered, which meant he didn't have it. "Holdbacks for indemnities." I asked. Silence. "Which council cleared founder attribution language?" His jaw ticked, eyes sliding to Isolde. I circled the date on my pad. "Thank you, this helps." He snapped. "Helps with what?" "With accuracy," I answered. Cassian pushed forward, desperate to end the silence. "Do you understand it's over?" I set down my pen, looked him full in the eyes, and said it calm as Sunday prayer. "All right. Good luck." The words hung heavier than any threat. Isolde's phone trembled. Cassian's breath hitched. They had prepared for anger, not serenity. "Leave the folder," I added. "The porch camera prints a receipt every minute." I stood, ending the scene without raising my voice. Control is often vertical. At the doorway, Isolde tried to twist the knife. "Milan will clear our heads." Cassian smirked. "We'll send you a postcard from a future you couldn't build." I answered evenly. "Have a safe flight." The door shut on their laughter, brittle as glass. My porch camera blinked red, its witness secured. I wrote Milan departure timing on my pad, underlined twice. Back at the table, I photographed every page of their so-called notice, attached my handwritten verbatim note, and emailed everything to Oberon Slate post-closing. Statements demanded, subject line, evidence notices and quotes. I called the utility fraud unit to reconfirm my case file, then set a travel alert on my bank. I scheduled a courier for a cease and desist about founder misrepresentation. Delivery by end of day. Paper beats pride. It always has. As I slid the folder into my fireproof box, my phone buzzed. An airline confirmation forwarded from the old shared calendar ATL MXP, tonight 8:05 p.m. Another ping as old as public post 2 passports beside a cappuccino, captioned New Chapter. I forwarded both to Oberon with a single line timing noted, then alone in my kitchen. I whispered it once more, smiling into the quiet. All right, good luck. The house exhaled with me. The house was too still. After Cassian and Isolde slammed my door yesterday, their perfume and arrogance still hung faint in the air, but today it was silence that pressed on me. That kind of quiet feels staged, like the world is holding its breath before another blow. I held the brass key from weeks ago in my palm, its weight reminding me that beginnings don't vanish because others decide so. Peace, I reminded myself, is never a gift, it's a warning. I brewed a pot of coffee, poured it black, and sat at the same table where Cassian tried to gut me with his words. The pen and pad were ready again, I told myself. They think absence means safety, but absence only grants me room to breathe. The doorbell chimed once measured, not rushed. Oberon Slate stood there with his briefcase, face sharp with purpose. He placed a stack of printouts between us, each page screaming louder than any knock. You need to see this, he said. The first sheets were screenshots. Isolde's manicured hand posting captions that slid knives into my name. Leadership must stay modern. Some elders confuse grief with guidance. Below, doctored photos from events my face cropped out like I'd never stood there. Another showed her smiling with Cassian. The text beneath a new era deserves clear voices, not trembling ones. My throat tightened, but I steadied it with one thought evidence. Oberon's voice cut through. This isn't just removal. This is character assassination. I tapped the stack. If they smear, they fear. If they had strength, they wouldn't need lies. Midway through our review, another interruption arrived. A courier envelope slid under my door. I broke the seal and unfolded papers marked bold notice to vacate. 30 days. My son's name signed at the bottom like a child playing landlord. Oberon flipped the pages fast, brow arched. This isn't enforceable. No seal, no service. It's intimidation, not law. I traced the date with my pen. They want fear more than fact. Anger rose hot in my chest, but I learned long ago that fire-controlled can burn longer than explosions. I wrote down mock eviction. Intimidation counter with affidavit, paper cuts both ways. I said, they forgot that. Oberon leaned in. Then we answer, not just defense, but exposure. We outline next steps like chess pieces, character witnesses from my decades of work, vendor affidavits, community leaders who remembered when Cassian still carried my briefcase to board meetings, strategy not rooted in rage but in record. I jotted a phrase at the top of my notes, attack me, I archive you. Memory bubbled up an early investor dinner at our old house, Thaddeus raising a glass. What she builds, I will protect. He kept half that promise until death stole the rest. That toast lives longer than any hashtag. They can edit photos, I whispered, but they can't edit memory. And memory testifies. Oberon nodded, then said, let's rehearse. Courtroom voices are theater. You need answers like stone. He slipped into Cassian's condescending tone. Isn't it true you're holding on past your time? I met his gaze. Calm. It's true I built it, and I can prove it. Then he channeled Isolde's sugar-cut venom. She's grieving, unstable. I replied steady. Grief doesn't erase competence. Evidence doesn't grieve. We repeated until my words landed like hammer strikes short. Exact. Preparation isn't paranoia, it's dignity rehearsed. As evening shadows lengthened, Oberon packed the papers back into his case. They'll overplay, he said. We'll be ready when they do. After he left, I scrolled once more through Isolde's latest post from Milan, a polished photo captioned, starting over, clean slate. I whispered into the empty kitchen. Slate isn't yours, it's mine. My phone buzzed, a board notification, emergency call scheduled, 9:00 a.m. I leaned back, let the silence settle again. They think distance shields them. Distance just clears my path. I set my teacup carefully on top of the yellow legal pad, the porcelain clink echoing just enough to steady me. My laptop camera blinked alive. Catching the framed founder's photo on the wall behind me, the one Cassian tried to bury under sleek rebranding, the emergency board call link opened at exactly 9 a.m. I tested my mic, lined up the PDF of my cease and desist, and cued a slim deck titled Attribution and Ownership Facts. Oberon's text popped, Board Counsel is present. Keep it factual, not emotional. I typed back, facts are patient. The chair's voice came warm with small talk. I cut through it before we proceed. Let the record reflect my presence as co-founder and trust beneficiary. I request this meeting be recorded and minutes distributed within 24 hours. Silence followed compliance, unspoken but clear. I began. 3 issues must be corrected first. Misuse of retirement language. Second, removal of founder attribution. Third, unauthorized public drafts. I shared lobby photos timestamped, mail receipts signed, copies of vendor notices. The board counsel asked, "Are you seeking injunctive relief?" I answered evenly. "Only if internal correction fails by close of business today." The chair pressed for context. I gave them 5 sentences. Dates, not blame. Corrections now cost nothing. Corrections later cost reputation. Silence stretched again, the sound of calculators working in minds. Then I clicked the slide that changed the air in the room. Duval Meridian Trust. Beneath it, patents, international distribution rights, commercial realty assets untouched by Cassian's so-called sale. The operating company was transferred, I said calmly, but not the crown. Use of founder likeness and history falls under trust licenses. Any erasure voids those rights. Board counsel's breath caught. So if attribution shifts, marketing loses legal cover, correct. I pointed to the clause violation suspends licenses immediately. Continuity is my preference. Revisionism is not. The chair murmured about executive session. Happy to stay on record, I replied. Then a new tile flashed on screen, Cassian. Airport lounge behind him. Italian announcements bleeding through. His swagger lasted seconds. A clerk's voice barked. La carta è respinta. Isolde hissed off camera. Try the black card. Their mic refused to cooperate. The chair asked gently. Is this a bad time? I looked square into my lens. It's precisely the right time. This is why governance belongs on paper, not promises. Oberon pinged anchor, don't gloat. I nodded once. Counsel spoke next. Clipped immediate halt to retirement announcements. Founder references restored pending review. Hands lifted on screen. Majority in favor. I added. Send notice to all vendors rescinding removal orders. Preserve drafts and correspondence. Spoliation equals intent, one director admitted. We weren't aware of the trust's scope. Awareness is curable. I said, erasure isn't. The vote passed. I wrote down the motion number and time, slow and deliberate. While the call continued, my cell lit up. Call 1 of 35, Cassian. I tapped silence. Calls 2 through 10 arrived in clusters. I flipped the phone face down. By call 20, Isolde tried her luck. I declined all the same. My boardroom voice steady, corrections by 5 p.m. After that, outside counsel. The 35th call landed just as the chair adjourned. I let it ring until voicemail, then logged it 35 calls. Too late. Oberon phoned after. You earned a procedural victory. Don't make it personal. We sketched next steps, vendor notices, edited minutes, counsel follow-up. He urged a short public line if pressed. We value continuity. We correct inaccuracies promptly. I asked for cross-checks on vendor lists against trust license numbers. He warned. Expect blowback. I left the door open for truth. I told him, not trespass. When he hung up, I filed the deck and emailed myself the recording link. The room smelled faintly of tea and ink, the scent of order reclaiming chaos. Then my phone buzzed again. Not Cassian, a Milan number I didn't recognize. Voicemail transcribed Signora Duval. We require payment or you vacate the suite. Another message followed. Sharp and urgent buyer's counsel demanding discussion about asset scope misunderstandings. I set the phone down, poured fresh tea, and said to the empty kitchen, facts travel slower than flights, but they land. On a fresh page, I titled a list, Milan Hospitality and Buyer Counsel, Leverage. The pen scratched steady, not shaken. Oberon's email landed just after lunch. Attached were grainy videos ripped from social media, Cassian and Isolde being escorted out of their Milan hotel. The headline read, "American couple removed after unpaid suite bill." Isolde's voice pierced the shaky audio, shrill and desperate, while Cassian tried to cover his face with his jacket. Strangers filmed gleefully, posting clips before the dust settled. I didn't smile. Humiliation isn't justice, it's a symptom. The world was seeing what I had already known at Thaddeus's grave: arrogance eats its own. I opened my logbook and wrote in steady strokes, "Coverage Milan expulsion. Source public. Leverage noted." My hand paused only once, the pen hovering over the page as I whispered to the room, "Fame has a short memory, paper does not." Minutes later, my phone vibrated an international number. I answered, voice level, "This is Marceline Duval," a clipped accent. "Madame Duval, this is buyer's counsel. We need to revisit asset scope." I leaned back in my chair. "Go ahead." They spoke quickly, urgency leaking through polished words. They admitted Cassian hadn't disclosed the trust controls, that their purchase relied on misrepresentation. They needed clarification. I answered. "Controls aren't clarifications, they're facts, binding ones." Oberon joined midway, his tone sharper than mine. "Counsel, we'll expect a draft correction of scope admissions by tomorrow." They agreed. My pen moved, capturing every word. The leverage was shifting. I could feel the boardroom walls trembling from miles away. Then came Isolde's voice. Syrupy on voicemail. "Marceline, please, be reasonable for Cassian's sake. Think of the future. You're alone in that big house." She paused, her mask slipping. "Don't make this messy." I didn't respond. I saved the file, attached it to evidence. My future is exactly what I'm protecting, I thought, and I protect it by keeping people like you at a distance. The next twist came from an unexpected place. An email marked confidential blinked in my inbox. A former junior counsel at Cassian's firm, someone I barely remembered from board luncheons. Their message was plain: "I left because I was told to delete every reference to you." It was wrong. Here are the files. Attached were internal memos Cassian and Isolde instructing staff to omit trust terms. Deliberately hiding my role, reading them. I felt a chill, not of fear but of recognition. Proof doesn't always scream, sometimes it whispers in black and white. I forwarded everything to Oberon, chain of custody intact, witness ready. His reply was instant. Bulletproof. I sat back, breathing slowly. Sometimes allies don't arrive from loyalty but from conscience. That I could respect. By evening, Cassian finally texted, "Mom, you don't understand. Everything I did was for us." I didn't dignify it with a response. Instead, I screen captured it, labeled the file, and added it to my ledger of truth. Silence isn't weakness. It's a space where truth can stand without interruption. At my kitchen table, folders spread like maps of old battles. I whispered, "This isn't about revenge, it's about correction." The house felt lighter. Though the storm still circled, the phone rang again, Oberon's calm voice grounding me. "With this witness, we don't just have leverage, we have exposure." "Exposure ends reputations," I said. "Are the board ready for that?" "They don't have a choice," he answered. "Tomorrow, if they resist, the documents go public." I closed my notebook, wrote in bold letters across the top, "Tomorrow, truth unveiled." And I ended the night with one clear thought. They believed Milan was the height of their humiliation. They haven't seen judgment yet. I woke before the sun, the kitchen light still humming from last night. My inbox was stacked high messages from board counsel asking for clarifications, vendors writing nervously about logos they had taken down, and journalists probing for sound bites. Oberon's note came in at 7:12 sharp. "Hold the line, so we control cadence." His words steadied me. I took my yellow pad and drew 3 boxes: board first, buyer second, public third. In the margin, I wrote one word in all caps: employees. Before anything else, their futures had to be secured. I replayed, without sound, the Milan clip of Cassian being let out of that hotel. I refused to confuse shame with justice. Justice is policy, not gossip. At the sink, hands resting on cool porcelain, I whispered a short prayer: "Let me be firm without being cruel." Then I sat down, files lined neatly: trust licenses, attribution exhibits, vendor lists, tenure records for severance. The first call was buyer's counsel. Their tone was stripped of bravado. "Madam Duval, we want continuity. We'll honor the trust structure. Continuity requires restitution," I replied. Measured and calm, I listed my conditions: full founder attribution restored, ironclad compliance with every IP clause, and a protection fund for employees who had been harmed by Cassian's reckless sale. After a pause, they offered terms: Cassian's personal indemnity for misrepresentation, buyer-funded severance and retraining for staff, and an advisory retainer for me for 1 year. I leaned closer to the screen. Add a scholarship in Thaddeus's name for supply chain students at an HBCU, and quarterly public reports on that employee fund. There was silence long enough to count heartbeats, then agreed in principle, drafts within 24 hours. I closed with one sentence. Respect is a deliverable. Deliver it in writing. The board met next. I requested that the prior motion, the one from 2 chapters ago, be updated to state clearly my role as co-founder and trustee authority. Council nodded, and the chair asked for a governance path forward. I laid it out: immediate halt on rebranding, audit of all vendor communications, and a standing policy that no founder attribution can be altered without trustee approval. The motion passed quickly. I added, preserve every record. If anything disappears, I will put spoliation on the record. A few directors thanked me for stability. I told them plainly, stability is the dividend of honesty. But the call wasn't over. Governance Committee opened a new item: disciplinary action against Cassian. Council listed the grounds: misrepresentation to the buyer, violations of communication policy, reputational harm. The vote was swift: suspend his corporate access, freeze his cards, and demand the return of devices for forensic review. A removal hearing was scheduled, though he would be allowed a written defense. I didn't cheer. I wrote in my notes: institution first, family later. Then I asked that HR inform staff that severance would be funded by the buyer settlement. The chair agreed. When the meeting ended, Oberon called me privately. "We need a public statement." He said, "I thought of all the words I could use, then chose the shortest. We correct the record and continue the work. Foundation stays strong when the truth stays public." We added one line about the employee fund and the scholarship. No names, no blame. Within an hour, radio hosts were reading it on air. Friends from church texted me hearts. A retired vendor wrote, "Took you long enough to accept credit?" I smiled. Credit isn't a trophy, it's a responsibility to those who built alongside me. Then came the shock. An email from Isolde, forwarded to the board and to the buyer. It was her memo. Untouched: Cassian's plan to minimize the mother narrative and scrub founder imagery for modern optics. I read it twice. Betrayal eats itself. Here was proof. I forwarded it to Oberon. He answered in minutes. "This closes the loop on intent." I whispered to the window. "Truth doesn't need allies, just daylight." By late afternoon, Cassian himself texted me, "Mom, please. I can fix this if you just talk to me." I called, not out of softness, but clarity. "You're not a boy. You made adult choices. Now face adult terms. Are these sanctions you're doing?" he asked, his voice fraying. "No," I said. "Your signatures did that." Then, after a pause, I gave him one chance at dignity. "If you walk in honest at the hearing, you won't be facing me. You'll be facing the truth." He hung up without goodbye. I logged the call and exhaled slowly. At dusk, my phone lit again. Oberon's message buyer filed civil notice in Fulton County naming Cassian personally. Moments later, the doorbell rang. A process server stood there, envelope in hand. "Does Cassian Duval live here?" "No," I said simply, and closed the door. My phone buzzed once more, Milan Council requesting my sworn declaration. I poured myself tea and wrote on my pad, "Declaration dates, clauses, no adjectives. Justice doesn't need my anger. It only requires my memory." The house had grown quieter, not empty, not cold, just quieter. For weeks, I had woken to a flood of messages, calls, and demands stacked higher than any kitchen counter. Now, it was a trickle. The settlement was signed, the board's corrections filed. Cassian suspended with his name boxed into legal minutes. Even the gossip in town had lost its heat. It sounded more like idle traffic than judgment. I walked through my kitchen in the morning sun, watching how the light scattered across the stacks of folders I had not touched in days. They looked like relics of another war. I gathered them into a drawer, shut it firm, and whispered to no one in particular. The paper trail is done. The heart trail remains. There was fatigue in me, yes, but also a strange calm, as if silence was the shape grief and betrayal eventually took. When Cassian called, his voice surprised me. It wasn't frantic or defensive, it carried a kind of weariness. He asked if we could meet at the steps of the old family church. I agreed, not because I hoped for repair, but because some endings deserved to be spoken aloud. The church sat still in the afternoon heat, brick walls holding decades of prayers. Cassian arrived in plain clothes, no tie, no polished shoes, nothing to shield him but his own face. He sat beside me, the steps creaking beneath our weight. I thought I was protecting us. He began, his tone low like a man speaking to himself. I looked straight ahead. You were protecting your reflection in a window, not the house that held it. His hands fumbled against his knees. Silence swelled between us, heavier than any excuse. Then he asked what he came to ask. Is forgiveness possible? I turned to him. Steady. Forgiveness is a gift I keep for myself. Restoration is something you lost. He tried again, saying he could prove loyalty, show me he was still the son who wanted to carry Thaddeus's legacy. I cut him short. You had your proving ground. You burned it down with your own hand? For a moment, his eyes lowered, and I saw the boy I once taught to read, the boy who stumbled through Psalms at our kitchen table. But motherhood and guardianship are not the same. Motherhood never ends. Guardianship does. You'll always be my son, I said quietly, but you are not my partner in legacy. He nodded, slow, as if each inch of movement cost him something. Without a hug, without another word, he walked away, and for the first time in months, I did not feel hollow. I felt lighter. That Sunday, I sat in church again, this time surrounded by neighbors who had watched the story unfold from the sidelines. Whispers turned into encouragement, hands rested gently on my shoulders. Eudora Finchley prayed with me, her voice tender. Strength isn't in holding on, it's in releasing without collapse. Children ran through the aisle after service, their laughter cutting through the last of my heaviness. I realized continuity was never in boardrooms or legal filings. It was in these pews, these kitchens, these classrooms. My strength wasn't a clause in a contract, it was community. Later that day, I wrote a letter not for the press, not for the board, not even for Cassian. It was only for me. Burden once meant weight. I wrote. Now it means proof I carried more than they knew. I folded the letter, sealed it with care, and placed it in a box with Thaddeus's photograph and the deed to our home. Legacy isn't what others take from you. It's what you guard, what you pass intact to those who come after. I set the box high on a shelf, out of reach but never out of memory. Evening found me on the porch, tea warming my hands. No phone rang, no Milan numbers blinked at me. The streetlights came on, one by one, quiet witnesses. I'm not a burden, I whispered. I'm the pillar they leaned on until it cracked and I'm still standing. The night air was still. I knew tomorrow would come with choices, but not with chains. For the first time, I felt the door of the past closing gently, without needing me to look back. Morning came with a clarity I had not felt in years. The city was just waking, but I was already dressed in my navy suit, the one I had worn for board meetings when Thaddeus was alive. Oberon met me in the corridor outside the board's special session, his briefcase snapping shut with the kind of precision that told me the agenda was final. He whispered, sanctions, removal, and vendor notice. Today the language gets ink. Inside, council read findings aloud: misrepresentation, unauthorized communication, reputational harm. Each phrase landed like stones placed carefully on a scale. I sat still, jotting clauses word for word, each one a marker of what had been done. The vote was swift. Cassian's suspension became removal for cause. His access and titles were revoked, his devices recalled, notices sent to every counterparty. I asked the minutes to cite the trust license numbers directly, so the record could not be softened later. HR confirmed the Employee Protection Fund would tie to real checks and retraining dates. I signed a companion memo. Founder attribution is a non-waivable term. The pen felt heavier than it looked. Cassian was absent. His counsel received the decision by email. I did not turn toward the door. By midday, we were in Fulton County filing the settlement that had been hammered from weeks of arguments. Buyer's counsel laid each page on the counter, and the clerk's stamp fell with a quiet thud. The settlement carried my fingerprints, founder credit restored, IP license compliance perpetual, restitution assigned directly to Cashin's missteps, and an independent overseer for the employee fund. I pressed harder on 2 editions, an annual scholarship in Thaddeus's name at an HBCU, and quarterly public reports so nothing could be hidden in shadows. Buyer's counsel bowed his head slightly and said, "Continuity is possible because of you." I answered, "Continuity isn't luck, it's maintenance." Outside the courthouse, I inhaled deep. Justice wasn't thrilling, it was steadying that afternoon. I stood in an auditorium beneath the banner Thaddeus Duvall Scholars. The dean spoke of resilience and wealth built in communities, while students lined up not with gossip, but with questions about internships. When my turn came, I kept it short. "We don't gatekeep ladders here, we build them. If I climbed, you'll climb steadier. No theatrics, no bitterness, just a bridge forward." A church elder squeezed my hand as I stepped down. "You turned a bruise into a blueprint." That was all the applause I needed. Outside the hall, Cassian waited under a spreading oak, no entourage, no sharp suit, just my son with a tired face. "Mama," he said softly, but I raised my palm. Words must answer actions. I laid the terms plainly. "You will not trade on our name. You will not petition the board for reinstatement. If you want a life, build one without my keys." He asked if he could work within the scholarship to make amends. I told him, "There are no back doors. Apply like everyone else. Earn it in daylight." His face tightened, broke, then softened again. Anger flashed, then shame, then something like recognition. "This isn't exile," I added. "It's adulthood." He walked away without fight, and for once I did not feel pulled after him. Later, a notice came across my phone. Isolde had been censured by the ethics group she once courted. Her memo folded against her like a blade turned backward. I sent no messages, made no jokes. I wrote one line in my journal, "A record is a mirror. Some folks just don't like what they see." Institutions carried their own weight now. My focus shifted toward the first scholarship cohort and vendor sessions that would patch wounds money alone could not. By dusk, I returned home and opened the safe. Inside lay the trust papers, patent ledgers, the deed. I added a codicil to my will, binding future heirs to community vote triggers before altering core assets. I drafted words for a plaque in the lobby built by hands that counted inventory and dreams. It wasn't for me, it was for the next woman told to sit quiet in a meeting. Sliding the last notarized page into its sleeve, I whispered, "Ledger closed, on the porch, tea in hand." I recorded a short video message to my church circle and small business owners. "Keep your titles clean and your minutes cleaner. Put sunlight clauses in every deal. Document kindness like you document cash, and don't confuse peace with silence or forgiveness with permission." I didn't name Cassian. I named lessons. Streetlights flicked on as if nodding approval. If someone calls you a burden, I concluded, check what they were leaning on. I set the phone down. Cicadas began their song. Then came a ping, an email from a young woman in Houston I was told to keep quiet in meetings. "Your video says otherwise. Do you have room for one more apprentice?" I smiled, unlocked my calendar, and made space. My story and my reckoning had found its period. Hers was just beginning.